welcome back. Everyone's full of energy here. We're getting claps. It's wonderful. Hopefully you enjoyed your lunch break wherever you are in the world. Now, we are talking about something that we mentioned earlier this morning, and that is collaboration. It really is one of the main goals of World DAB. And actually, over many years, we've been working with the automotive industry to ensure that, well, there's really a greater understanding of all of the challenges faced by radio broadcasters and the vehicle manufacturers. Now, a bit more recently, we've actually focused on greater collaboration amongst the broadcasters and also the other industry associations and organisations from all around the world. Now, interestingly, a really good example of that is the car buyer survey that we mentioned earlier, which saw a huge amount of collaboration between broadcasters from the US, Europe and Australia. Now, two of the associations that we work closely with are the National Association of Broadcasters in the US and then the European Broadcasting Union. And in this session, that's what we're going to focus on. And it gives me great pleasure to say that on stage, joining me now, is Ben Poor from the EBU. And joining us remotely is April Carty-Sipp from NAB. So welcome to you both, and I will hand over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is going to be an interesting session because I have the pleasure of having April on a Zoom call, but I'll be here with you physically. And we're just going to have a nice little conversation amongst the two of us and explore a little bit about what both our organizations are doing in the connected car space. And I think it's fair to say that we're both doing things, we both have activities. I'm really quite interested, April, what are some of the ways in which you organize yourselves with conversations with vehicle manufacturers, conversations with the industry? What sort of structures and groups do you have inside the NAB?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Nikki. It is a pleasure to be here with you all the way from the United States. I'm in Washington, D.C. currently and wish I could be there in person. To answer your question, our membership at NAB is defined as the radio station itself. And there are thousands of stations in the US that are members. So on top of the radio board, which services all of our radio community, we have several committees. So two of the committees in particular that work in this direct space are our Radio Technology Committee and our Auto Initiatives Committee. So the Radio Technology Committee has about 30 members, and they focus just on that, technology in this space. And the Auto Innovation Group has broadcasters that are in the technology and innovation space, but they're currently more focused on the business side of radio and in the infotainment system in the car. So one thing that we've talked about specifically is that the mission of this organization and this group is that the committee is meant to work with manufacturers and to them specifically to understand radio's value in the car and to secure placement for AM and FM in these automobiles. Our EVP of Technology and Innovation also met with the CEO and president of the Alliance for Auto Innovation, which is a US company. We met with them. We met with the head of technology, the head of safety, and also the head of policy. So the technology has about 98%, this group has about 98% of cars and vehicles sold in the US that are part of their organization. So we presented them with research as far as the World DAB research, and also invited their head of safety to speak to the NAB show and presented, the research to them. And we also recently met with auto manufacturers. For example, last month I was in Detroit and we met with Ford and specifically the head of services for marketing strategy and the head of media and entertainment at their offices. So we went over the car buyer survey that you talked about. We talked about the Ford priorities briefly and also the Android Automotive project. So that's one example of the engagement, that we have. And also, obviously, we have Android Automotive Initiative, which I'm happy to dive into in a minute.
You dropped out a little bit there, April, but it was great to hear some of the initiatives that the NAB are doing. Of course, being the NAB based in the US, of course, you're a lot closer to the large US-based automotive manufacturers. I think it's fair to say, if I understand your question as you dropped out, the EBU has its own structures as well. We're very pleased to have a lot of engaged members. I think for our members, the connected car is a really hot topic and has been for a number of years. We have different areas that work inside this domain. So, for instance, our own radio committee, which is managed by my colleague Edita, the head of radio in the EBU. They really have quite a key focus on what happens with radio in the connected car. And it's really taxed them over many years. And it's something that really focuses their attention. They're mainly made up of radio directors of a lot of the largest public service broadcasters across Europe. So they probably think on a more high-level strategic angle. For my own part, I work in the technology and innovation department. So a lot of the work that I do is far more on, should we say, the nuts and bolts, actually thinking about things like standardization, metadata, a lot of which we've talked about today, actually how we get the data to the car manufacturers, maybe through third parties such as Radio Player or some of the other aggregators. As part of that, we have a group called the Connected Cars and Devices Group. It's probably more about connected cars and devices, but we leave that open. It's actually chaired by my colleague Elisha Sessions, who's been shouted out today, if that's a verb. So we're really pleased for that. And a lot of the members that we have inside that group are really, really engaged, a really smart bunch of people that work across technical and strategy, but also product owners and managers. So they're the people who are working out what their own radio services looks like in cars. And I think it's been a really collaborative group. It's been a really pleasing group to be part of and to be coordinating that. And I think we are really getting some way into making contact with OEMs, car manufacturers, chip manufacturers, service providers, and other technology providers, especially in the voice area as well. So that's been a really good group. We also have a bunch of other activities in the EBU, such as, probably most importantly actually, a lot of European Union liaison, so doing things like policy discussions, doing things like lobbying in Brussels. Something that came up some years ago was, it's been mentioned today, the EECC. I know there were a couple of E's and a couple of C's. I knew I'd get that wrong. And that was something that my colleagues in Brussels were very involved with through the European Digital Radio Alliance. That was very successful. We heard earlier on that in Europe, digital radios are in, I think it was 94% of all new cars. That's a fantastic figure. And it just goes to show for me what happens when there's a clear goal, there's an objective, it's something that we work across industry to achieve, and we get it done. We get it done as a collaboration between different industry partners, commercial, private, the car manufacturers as well. So that's been a really good thing for the EBU to be part of. I guess I'm hoping you're still there, April. I did hear you laugh a little bit earlier on. Fantastic. Sorry about the connections there. A question I really wanted to know was, what do you and your members feel are some of the major challenges in the car? I know there's so much we could talk about, but maybe if you can identify one or two.
There is. So can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so one challenge that is actually not a European issue, but other places around the world, specifically the Canada and US for sure, is AM service. So when we meet directly with these manufacturers in the US, one of the items they mention most as a challenge to us is, we have to figure out the AM issue in the electric vehicles. And, because of that electric component that, the power that generates the electromagnetic interference sometimes interferes with the AM broadcast reception and could result in static. And there's a perception of this is that there's a larger issue because there is a solution. An example is the chip manufacturer NXP. They have developed chips and architecture that can combat this interference issue of the electric motors in the AM radio. And NEB has also been doing all digital AM testing with Xperi on the signal coverage of vehicles, both electric and the internal combustion engine, and found some good results with the testing as far as noise, literally driving around and testing it in different areas. One other important note is actually that the audience, that's listening to AM radio on the US in a regular basis is very large. This doesn't only affect small markets and rural areas, but large markets in the US where we're talking about 400 or 600,000 listeners a week in some cities, from like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. In some cases, it's number one in the market, and they talk about the content that's really important, to get across, which are the news and the talk stations, the local stations that provide this important information to the public. And overall, there's a stat we just found that it adds up to about 48 million listeners a week in the United States alone, just for AM stations. So it really is an important one, for auto manufacturers to keep in the car as well. And like I said, there are solutions. What about you? I know we probably share a lot in common too, but that's one I wanted to make sure we mentioned.
We don't necessarily have too much AM no longer, anyway, in Europe. But I think some of the things that I hear from our members about the challenges are really around prominence. And we've talked a bit about that today. We talked a bit about having a dedicated radio button, whether that affects prominence. But I think our members are exercised about how radio services will be prominent in the future, whether that would be a defined radio button or a radio application, but also, for instance, their own applications. How do we ensure that public service broadcasters are as prominent as they've been enjoying for the last 100 years or so? Because they are really a key part of how we consider our cultural society to be the disseminators of information, entertainment, and education. So for our members, having, should we say, a front and center position on the dashboard is something that they find really important.
Love that. One thing that I'd love to hear too is, what do you think as far as, not just the challenges, but, one of the things we talked about is opportunities, and, not just opportunity, but, what can we do, together, between us in the United States and you there as far as, radio's role in the dashboard in the future?
That's a good question. I mean, the first step is we're talking. We've had a great collaboration with the NAB on a number of different topics. And I think the fantastic thing about broadcasting unions is that they also associate with each other as well. So I think definitely carrying that conversation is a really important part of this. And I'd love to see that happen in the future. As regards the future, should we say, of radio on the dashboard, I kind of flip-flop between pessimism and optimism. I'm actually quite optimistic today because I've heard some great things. But I think the one thing I want to highlight is radio broadcasters have something, kind of a secret sauce. They have a magic gift, which is they're content producers. They make content. Car manufacturers want content in their car. That's what we've been hearing. And actually, especially public service broadcasters, they have content, they produce loads of content every single day, but they have decades, maybe even 100 years worth of content that is still useful, that audiences still want. And it's all about unlocking that and then making that available to audiences in the connected car. So I think broadcasters are really sitting on a hugely valuable resource of content and expertise that is still relevant, that is still important. I mean, I guess the same goes for your members as well, April.
Absolutely. The research we did and partner together was definitely a great step. One of the things I know you and I talked about on the Zoom that we'd love to do is sharing notes and maybe having our committee meet with your committee to discuss some of the things that we've learned together across the board. Not only are we planning meetings with the Auto Alliance, our Alliance for Auto Innovation between the committees, but also meeting with you and your groups, to see what we could learn together. And then, one other note is, obviously we've been working, NAB's been working really hard on the Android Automotive project. And do I have enough time to briefly mention it?
I think so. We've talked about it a bit earlier on, but absolutely go for it.
Excellent. So I know we've talked about the technology behind it, but, as far as just wanted to give a quick update, we have many U.S. participants, as you know, from Odyssey, Beasley, Cox, iHeartMedia, New York Public Radio, NPR. There's worldwide ones, World DAB, Commercial Radio Australia, BBC, to name a few. And then in the auto space, we have Ford, Volkswagen, Audi, Cariad participating. And just a few weeks ago, the NAB staff met on this project on May 23rd. I got the exact date. And had their first technology call with the Android Automotive product managers and product engineers, whose sole responsibility is for this type of software, the Android Open Space Project, or AOSP. So our team met with them, and so it really, the fact that we're engaging so well with Google, it's clear that Google's committing significant resources to having this conversation and the work that we spent on the project. So that's the short update I have, but, from that team and the pilot program, and, Sam Matheny and John Clark and, David Lair and our team at NAB all work on these projects together. So just wanted to make sure I gave them a shout out too.
Okay, great. Well, that sounds fantastic. And certainly we in UBU support the objectives of your Android Automotive project. So I hope we hear more about that in future. Well, it sounds like we have a lot of things that we could be working on. So I'm hoping we'll take that conversation forward into the future. Thank you, April.
Absolutely. I'm sorry that my connection didn't work, but I'm going to log off and log back on for the question part. So hopefully my video will come back.
Brilliant. Well, Well, a huge thank you there to April and Ben. A great relationship flourishing across the Atlantic.
Over Zoom.
Exactly. And in true radio style, we didn't need to see video of April. We kept it to audio only. And continuing the theme of collaboration and partnerships, actually, our next duo are going to share a joint perspective of how vehicle manufacturers design a voice-controlled infotainment system using phoneme-based speech recognition, and also how radio broadcasters can ensure that their station is really easily discoverable in the digital dashboard. So, welcoming remotely, we have Jamie Show from Commercial Radio Australia. Welcome, and over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Nikki. Apologies in advance for Christian, who is stuck on a plane in Hamburg. So I'll be covering off parts of Christian's presentation. Okay, so let's get started with looking at voice controls for the car. Our interest here from an Australian point of view is coming from a couple of points. One is this is a country that is driven by cars. So 80% of Australians who listen to radio each week are actually listening to it in their cars. At the same time, from a Commercial Radio Australia point of view, we've developed an industry aggregator app for Australia. And that has led us to get some insights into what's going on with voice. So what we see is the solution that we've created for voice and how it can be applied for automotive into the future. So if we take a look at the first slide, actually the second slide, if we can move on to this one. Yes. So starting off with our learnings from having an aggregator app and then applying it to voice, we realized that there were a number of problems that we needed to fix before we could even have Australian radio stations working in the car via voice. The first thing that we found is that even though these radio stations existed for a long period of time, they didn't actually work on voice. So from our point of view, we had world first industry partnerships with Amazon and Google, in which an industry body for one country delivered all of the country's radio stations for Amazon and Google speakers and assistants. And what we found in that situation is that accuracy was about 30%. When users were asking for a radio station, they were either getting the incorrect radio station, the wrong sister station, or perhaps a radio station of the same name in another country. So that was a big problem. The second thing is what was of appeal for the tech provider, the voice assistant provider, is having just one pipe. So there was very little interest in entering into unilateral agreements with each and every broadcaster and arranging for them to be integrated into the voice world. A very clear desire on the part of voice assistant operators to have just one partner. Thirdly, a lack of ready assets. So by that I mean broadcasters had not contemplated the visual nature of being in a voice environment. So logos, station slogans. So when you would ask a device for a radio station, you would often get a low resolution, incorrect, out of date slogan or logo that didn't work. And future proofing. So right at the start, from when we started doing this, we were thinking about how would this work for the car, knowing that the ultimate end application for voice was going to be the car. So all the work that we've done over the last few years has set the foundation for what's coming up with cars. If we move on to the next slide, we approached the solution as follows. Having one industry partner work on behalf of the Australian radio industry to deliver radio to the to voice assistants. Like many territories, that is easier said than done. Each broadcaster has their own digital strategy. Each broadcaster has their own app strategy. And so to convince everyone to work together, knowing that there are big tech partners here at play, was a big piece of work. The second thing is new uniform guidelines. So it wasn't just enough just to have the single pipe and pump in all the station metadata. It was about making sure that there were guidelines associated with those that were maintained and that worked to make stations available as best as they possibly can be. Moving on to the next slide, where we started off our conversations with broadcasters was starting the conversation with voice from scratch, because most broadcasters had not really thought about how they were going to live in the voice world. So some questions that we posed to each broadcaster. how many different ways will users actually ask for your stations in real life? It's a complicated question particularly because of stations that have been around for a long period of time, may have had a name change, may have had a frequency change. There were some broadcasters that were telling us that there were about 12 to 15 different ways that a user might ask for a radio station. Sounds pretty ridiculous, but the questions that we had to challenge them on to work through that. The next point is, how do you want the voice assistant to announce your station, and how do you want it to appear? So what happens in Australia happens in other territories in the world, where a station, particularly one that has a frequency in its name, they might use the word point in the station name, or they might use the word dot, or they might not use the decimal point at all in the station name, but it might actually appear in the station logo, or it might appear in how the station is written. So we have to reconcile not only how does the voice assistant recognize the station, but how it'll announce the station and how it'll display it on screen. And then what happens if a station changes its name? So what can we do to ensure that a user asking for the station gets the correct one if they happen to ask for its old historical name? So looking at the next slide, I'm going to use the example of the studio that I'm in tonight. I'm in the Nova Sydney studios tonight because it's much better than you guys having to look on a big screen at my lounge room. So if we use the example of Nova 96.9 and how we set them up for voice, we ended up signing off on 5 phrases. So Nova, of course, 96.9. Now, this may seem a little bit natural for a broadcaster to think this way, because they spend so much time reinforcing their brand name in market. But there are enough cars in this country that don't even have FM RDS, older cars, that many drivers are actually accustomed to just thinking about their favorite radio stations in the car by their frequency. So 96.9 needed to be covered as a standalone phrase. Nova 96.9, of course, that's the station name. The station was, however, called Nova 969 for most of its life. So we needed to make sure that matched. And the phrase Nova Sydney. So there are 5 Novas in Australia, plus a bunch of DAB plus spin-offs. So checking that works right. So they're the phrases that we wanted it to match. Then came the metadata that accompanies it for that voice environment. So the slogan, the artwork. Now with the artwork, we've stored 6 different logos in different sizes and dimensions in anticipation of future screen users. So that served us very, very well. And there's quality control around that. So there's issues of resolution and image size and whatever, so that regardless of which station the user is asking for, the radio experience is just as good as if they're listening to Nova or a competitor station. Now, the anchor point of the station in many respects is the frequency. So if a user asks for Nova 96.9 in Sydney, the perfect outcome for us is that the station actually gets delivered to them on DAB Plus first. And then if that's not available, it falls back to FM. And if that's not available, it falls back to the stream URL. So we also have to bear in mind too that amongst the 400 or so streams and radio stations that we look after in Australia, there's 6 of those that are on 96.9. And so we have to make sure that the user is given the right one, so that the voice assistant in the car doesn't interpret the request for 96.9 being somewhere else. As part of this too, it's not just about collecting the database and building this folder or this single pipe of quality station metadata that will work for a voice assistant and work for a speaker and ultimately work for the car. For us, there's a lot of technical work in getting it to the end destination. A big priority for me has been that, pardon me, that for future voice solutions, it has to require as little implementation work as possible on the part of our voice partner. We see it as kind of our job to make it as easy as possible to have Australian radio ingested. So for that purpose, our technical partner through all this work has been All In Media, right from the start of the development of our aggregator app through to the voice solutions that we have now for Amazon and Google, and for the ultimate automotive solutions down the track. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so how we maintain this work now? I think there are 4 key learnings for us after doing a bunch of years of voice now, and the anticipation of the car. What we've found is that once broadcasters start to really promote and be active with voice, they end up just promoting the one phrase. So the idea of a broadcaster saying that there's 12 or 15 different phrases, let's just focus on the one phrase, the golden utterance, and how can we make sure that that works every time? The other thing we've found too is that just because of station branding changes and how they organize their product, sometimes standards can slip on the part of the broadcaster. So our role here at Commercial Radio Australia is as the keeper of the standards, making sure that broadcasters adhere to, pardon me, having sure that their metadata is correct. Simple things like the station name and the slogan is not too long so that it doesn't get cut off on the screen, and logo dimensions and all of that. Then there's the role of testing. So we also play a role in making sure that that works. So the great thing is that the voice assistant partner, whether it be Amazon, Google, or Automotive, can be assured that there is someone keeping an eye on the quality of the product, getting to their destination. And then helping stations when starting a new station. Pardon me. This is a whole rabbit hole of work on its own. I'll quickly talk about this for 30 seconds. The classic error that broadcasters make when starting a new station is they don't check it for voice. If anything, before you even start an FM or DAB plus station, I'd recommend test it for voice first. So ask a speaker, ask a voice assistant, what does it think you said? If it interprets correctly the station name, that's the first step. You've passed the first test. The second thing is see what happens when you ask for that particular name. If there's an obvious or popular piece of content that gets surfaced, maybe that's not the right station name. Maybe you may need to be more particular with your station name. So we're currently working through that issue with an Australian broadcaster who has a station set up now who voice is having some trouble recognizing. So if you can catch those things at the pass before you start, that'll make things a lot easier for new station launches. So final takeouts, looking at the final slide, I think 4 big takeouts for me in terms of our experience with voice and how we'll approach it for the automotive future. The key takeouts for us in how we manage voice for the future and for automotive is to have that traffic cop. Absolutely work with broadcasters to help them get their product through to voice assistants, but really make sure you monitor and check the standards. Make the process as simple as possible for broadcasters. So don't make it too much of hard work for them, but also don't make it too much hard work for your automotive partner. You'll want them to know with confidence that this is an easy piece of content to ingest. The single pipe is really important. You want to make it as uncomplicated as possible. And as you move on, set very clear standards and maintain them. So you'll want to really look after that part for quality control to make sure that the automotive experience is as best it can be when your user asks for a radio station. So that's it for me, Nikki.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jamie. And we did get that last slide up. I don't know if you saw it, but we definitely saw it as you were talking it through. So thank you very much. Really, really interesting insight there on exactly what is happening in Australia. So now we're going to hear about it's a really exciting project that I'm looking forward to hearing more about because it brings together DAB broadcast radio and podcasts specifically for drivers. And I, for one, do a lot of driving, so I'm interested to hear more. So now it's time to hear from the co-founders of the SWR Audio Lab, Christian Hufnagel and Daniel Freytag.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we're gonna do this together, Daniel and I. But just a little bit of intro from my side. I'm Christian, the co-founder of the SWR Audio Lab, a small unit of the German broadcaster SWR that creates ideas and prototypes for the future of radio. For us, connected cars are one key focus, and from our standpoint, it's to identify future trends and figure out what we can do to help our stations take advantage of that. We want to understand what the system can offer, what's needed, and we're trying to help our stations to be in the best position when self-driving cars like the EQS here are on the road. The shift from FM to digital radio, DAB, is clearly underway. For millions of people across Germany, our core radio brands provide not just entertainment and information, but also service and safety updates during car journeys. We are continuously focused on using worldwide metadata standards such as radio DNS to secure the reception of our programs in a hybrid environment. In the best case, the listener doesn't even notice changes between the aggregated services and different broadcasting standards for an uninterrupted playback of their favorite radio station. With manufacturers updating their in-car dashboards to serve changing customer demands, this field is becoming more fragmented, and the screens are gradually becoming larger and more visually appealing. Slideshows via DAB are a great first step to use this space and to provide a better experience to users. We've been hearing now a lot about technical stuff in the beginning. I would like to track a little bit back and ask why this is all happening. Where's the motivation for going to these techie routes? And what's next? First of all, I want to share SWR's vision video in relation for SWR audio services, and then we're gonna ping pong to Daniel to show some demo stuff afterwards.
The world around us speaks and hums and chirps and sings, and we can be happy to have more and more audio content available to listen to. The only thing is, audio content is often hard to find or only available for particular devices. But that's about to change. So let's take a look at what a future for audio might look like. Meet Kim. She's about to meet her friends, and on her way she is listening to her personal news mix. The festival was held in Baku. One point in particular interests Kim, so she asks a question.
Where's Baku?
Baku is the capital of Azerbaijan. Do you want to learn more about Azerbaijan?
Sure.
In the ensuing conversation, it's easy to discover related topics. When Kim hears a detail that might also interest her friend, she can easily share a short clip with her.
Hi, Susan. I'm sure you'll be interested in this.
It's nice when the city noise fades away and comes back at just the right moment. Kim can be sure to be aware of imminent danger. Kim reaches her shared car. Her audio content and preferences transferred to the car seamlessly. For the long ride, Kim chooses a well-balanced mix of music and info. Off she goes. Kim is also trying out a new feature today, the travel guide. For this, she enables the short-term use of her location data. Right now, she's driving past a striking landmark. A short, entertaining piece explains what it's all about. By the way, you are driving past Hohenzollern Castle right now. The castle has served as an impressive backdrop for several film productions. Kim has arrived at her friend's house. Together, they play an audio escape room. Atmospheric sounds and a captivating narrator lead the friends into an exciting sound world. They solve the puzzles by voice input. I'm afraid the key doesn't fit in this door, but maybe somewhere else. Should we go back to the main room and check? Will the three of them be able to work it out? Today, Kim showed us what the audio world of the future could look like. Flexible, for both active and passive moments in life. Seamless, across all devices. And individual, with personal customizations. We at SWR are uniquely positioned to make this future a reality. We are already creating content for many different listening formats. We are always looking for new ways to reach audiences. And we don't see personal data as a commodity. So, together, let's shape the future of audio.
For us, this vision opens completely new use cases with great opportunities to bring our content to new platforms. Full terrestrial broadcast functionality is necessary for consumers when an IP connection is not present and allows for a complete hybrid radio experience when it is. However, delivery of audio via IP is an increasingly important trend, and listeners are bringing their phones along on their journey or use embedded systems inside the car. With Android Automotive or Apple CarPlay, one simple connections give quick and easy access to the best things the phone has to offer directly on the dash. And as one example of this, we are prototyping a solution called Newscast to skip the components from the linear program and replace them with news content from our podcast and audio on demand world over IP. In close conversation with our listeners, we test those new ideas and develop them further. And now, please, Daniel, take the stage.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Christian, for the introduction. I hope you all liked our vision video. One of those visions is our aim to segment our audio offering, which means enriching it with metadata to make it more interactive for our users. One of those projects has been the relaunch of our mobile radio apps a couple of years ago, where we made the live radio stream way more interactive for our users, which means they could shift back in time, they can swap out certain elements, or they can also like and save items from our broadcast within the app and then listen to them on demand. And now we're also bringing this to our audio news offering, which means that we're moving away from like essentially one big audio chunk to a more item and playlist based format with additional metadata. And this really has two big advantages for us. Number one, now the news can never be old, because if we have a full show and then one audio bulletin changes afterwards or within the next hour or two, the editor simply has to replace that one bulletin instead of having to reproduce the entire show, which saves a lot of time and makes the playlist always up to date. And number two, obviously for the user, it's way more interactive. If they don't like a certain topic or a certain item in that news show, they can just skip ahead. And also we can add background pieces to those elements. So for example, if we only have a 30-second piece about a certain topic, but we might have a 2-minute or 3-minute piece, which goes a little bit more into detail, we can link those in the metadata fields. Then the user can decide to listen to a longer piece if they want to. To show you how this works, we're going to jump right into the Polestar emulator with our latest app version. But obviously this could run on any other car infotainment system as well, which runs on Android Automotive. Here in the first screen, you can see all of our radio stations where the user can select their favorite one. We're going to select SWR3, our main or biggest station for now. On the bottom left corner, you can see a new icon where the user can jump straight into the most recent news bulletins. This is helpful, for example, if you just started driving, you missed the recent news, you can simply click on that icon and it will play the most recent episodes. Another way to play the news is to go to our Theme and Plus or Topics tab in the app, where you can see a full list of the current shows that we are producing in this new interactive format. Then you can click on it and see a list of all the audio items within that particular program. Here in the bottom left corner, you'll again have a new icon which allows the user to opt into the longer audio pieces or the deep dive elements if they want to hear more about this particular story. Once that sub-item has ended, it will automatically play the next main item in our playlist and keep going on from there on. One important feature of the app is the ARD account, which is essentially the same account that users are using to log into ARD's audio and video on demand platforms. And here this allows the synchronization of the user preferences and playback positions across apps and devices, which means if a user started their journey in a car, listened to the first, let's say, 3 elements of a audio playlist, then arrives at home and wants to finish on their tablet device, it will automatically sync the playback positions and it will show the user on the tablet that they've already listened to the first 3 elements. Or it will also show that maybe I've listened to the entire playlist and just 1 or 2 audio elements changed. It will signalize this to me so I don't have to listen to the entire news show, just the difference that basically changed since the last time I visited. And to make this experience as seamless as possible, we're bringing the interactive audio news to all of our major platforms, which means here, as we saw in the car dashboard, but we're also bringing it to the mobile apps and to our website. All are available with the ARD account, so they will all work seamlessly together. I hope you liked our presentation and demo about our recent audio projects from SW Audio Lab. If you want to reach out or have any questions, comments, and so on, you can reach Christian and myself via lab@swr.de, and we are always happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
Well, a huge thank you there to Christian and Daniel, and absolutely fascinating, really exciting to see how these new types of content can keep radio relevant in the car today and, of course, going forward in the future. I particularly like the idea that when I'm driving and I drive past a place of sort of interest, my car is going to tell me about it, because I'm constantly going to new places, but I never know anything about the places I'm visiting. So I'm looking forward to that one. Keeping radio relevant is, of course, something which our next speaker knows more about than anyone. He's the chairman of the World DAB Technical Committee, which oversees the DAB technical standards, upgrading and advancing them in line with other technical developments. And the good news is for us, he's here today to tell us why it's so important for broadcasters to keep working towards providing the best metadata for the car. So it's now over to Lindsay Cornell from the BBC. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the introduction. Hello to everybody here and around the world. It's great to be here speaking and talking to you about the metadata imperative. Lovely title. I wish I'd chosen it myself. So what is metadata? We've heard the word about 47,000 times already today. Metadata is the data about data. So it describes what we want to describe, wherever that is. Now, for radio, what it's about is enhancing the audio listening experience, making that experience richer and more exciting than it would be just with the audio on its own. And that's particularly relevant, as we've seen with all these kind of new devices and so on. It's things like text and images. It's things like alternate frequencies. But we don't really need to know about that as users. So I'm really going to be talking about the metadata that makes a direct impact on people. And we've heard an awful lot from everybody about this. Technically speaking, and this is more or less the only technical part of this presentation, this metadata comes in two places. One is the FIC, the Fast Information Channel, and the other is the SPI, the Service and Program Information. So what's basic metadata? The most basic data is really the name of the station. That is the first interaction that you have as a listener with the audio listening experience. It's how you select. And traditionally, it's text. I mean, traditionally, in analog radio, it's a number that you have to dial up on your screen. But for digital radio, it's some text. And here's some examples. BBC Radio 4, Capital London, and LBC. And this information comes in the FIC. There's an awful lot of other information that comes there, but it's too much detail and we're not going to talk about it. So let's move on to enhanced metadata. And the kind of the most obvious enhancement to metadata is, instead of just having the station name, you also have the station's logo, the image, the projection of the values of the station out to the audience. And the logo in DAB can be delivered in different sizes. In fact, you need to deliver it in different sizes. And this logo, as we've seen in some of the examples earlier on, can be used to select the service that you want to listen to, instead of just using that textual name. We can also carry phonemes to enhance voice control. We can have aliases, different names that are used colloquially for a radio station in a particular audience. So there's an official name, and then there's the name that half the audience uses, half the others, and so on. So all of this enhanced metadata is contained in this thing called the SPI, Service and Program Information. And as the name implies, we've got service information and program information all together in this hybrid standard. The data that we can send, and the format of it is absolutely the same whether it's going out over broadcast, over DAB, or over IP. So it's truly hybrid. It means that you make it once, and it can go out, and it can do its job wherever and however it gets to the end. And the logos and the phonemes, the aliases, that's all part of the service information. And there's also the program information. And the program information is lots and lots of details. It could be images of the presenters. It could be images of, well, anything you like. It can also be credits. It can be talking about the topics coming up. Now, in this context of metadata in the car, it may not be so easy to use that, which is more interactive in drilling down into more information in that thing. We heard already about the driver distraction guidelines. This is a key thing. So I'm, again, just concentrating on the most relevant metadata for the car. And where is this relevant? It all comes to the user experience. And the quality of the user experience is, to a large part, dependent on the way that the metadata is managed and how it's presented to the user. So to try to make this topic of metadata a little bit more exciting, I'm going to try and paint you a little picture. You're on your first date, but it's your first date with your brand new car's infotainment system, and you're looking at this system, and it's got this amazing, beautiful color screen. High quality, sharp, huge, beautiful, marvelous. And the radio stations, they look wonderful. They're so easy to recognize. They've got their tasteful logos. Everything is looking good. The sound quality is amazing as well. Absolutely fantastic. So this date's going really, really well. However, you suddenly notice that a couple of your favorite stations aren't there. You can't find them. What are you going to do? So what do we do? How could we react? How could the experience of this first date be made better so that there's nothing missing? So what about collecting up all the data? So the car maker collects all the data up, all the logos, preloads them into his system, into the car. So when you have that first experience, it's absolutely perfect. Everything is there as you'd expect it. It's a lovely, lovely experience. That could be a really big task. If you're selling a vehicle, I don't know how many countries. We heard earlier, the 15 top countries, but there are more. So lots of cars going in lots of different directions, lots of radio stations. How do you know you've got them all? How do you make that perfect experience? That's not very easy. Let's assume, though, that first date went really, really well. And what happens when you've had a good first date? With a bit of luck, you have a second. So you're into your second date, and you've been listening to the radio at home. There's some fantastic new stations have been launched. You've really enjoyed them, and you're going off on a nice journey in your car, and you think, yeah, I'm going to listen to those stations in my car. Turn on the radio. They're not there. Why aren't they there? That's a problem. Okay, well, all right, a bit disappointed, but that's okay. I'll fall back on that fantastic classic rock station. I was thinking of Thomas when I wrote this presentation. Fantastic classic rock station. But again, you've pushed the button. There it is, the beautiful logo. You push the button, and what do you get? You get some twangy Dolly Parton, because they've rebranded the station. Now it's country and western, and that's not really what rocks your boat. Okay, so some silly examples, really, but to try to personalize or make the issue kind of relevant. And to make this whole thing work well, we have to have the metadata. The metadata has to be managed. It's not something that stands still. It's changing. Things do change. Stations don't rebrand every 5 minutes, but they do rebrand from time to time. New stations do get launched from time to time. So the broadcasters need to do their part. They've got to make sure that they're using the SPI, this standard way of delivering all this data. We had a question earlier on about, is there a standard way of doing it? Yes, there is. It's called the SPI. So that needs to be used by the broadcasters to deliver this metadata. And when something changes, that metadata's got to change. It's got to be kept in step. And for the device makers, well, they've got to make sure they're also using the SPI. They're receiving it, they're decoding it, they're using the information to update their local caches of information so that when the user interacts with the system, they get up-to-date, relevant metadata. Everything looks good. And when a new station launches or something rebrands, automatically, by going through this process, gathering the data, using the data, everything's up to date. Everything looks good. And as I said before, the SPI data, it's exactly the same format, whether it's broadcast or whether it's delivered by IP. And we know that vehicles move around. That's their kind of prime purpose, move around. So what we need to do is make sure that we deliver this data wirelessly. We can't be plugging in all the time. Something might change when we're out on the road. So if we deliver the SPI using DAB, we have the great advantage that the same connection, the same pipe, is bringing the audio data and all of this rich metadata together at the same time, the same place, the same pipe. So if you move into a new area, for example, you're going to get this rich data almost as soon as you are in that new location. If you're making a long journey, you're going to be in areas with new stations. You get that information just come over the air. If you also deliver the information via IP, make it available via mobile broadband, and the device is connected, then it can also update and it can collect the information for services maybe it's already experienced. They're already in your favorites list. That information can be updated even when you're out of area. So when you're back revisiting somewhere again, the information's already up to date. Now this is the standard. It says ETSI at the top. It's got the EBU and the DAB logo on it, so it's easy to recognize. And this is the thing that's got all the details of how you code it, what the information is, and so on. And that includes, it's been updated, it was published again, a new update published last month. It includes all of this extra assistance for voice control. So, finally, just as some conclusions, if you're a broadcaster, make sure you use the SPI to deliver your metadata over DAB, and that will enhance the experience that people have in the car environment, and indeed on any other devices that have a suitable screen. And you can also provide the metadata online, but if you do that, make sure again that you make it available in the SPI format, because then that can be dragged in exactly the same processes which already exist, can be decoded and updates the user experience without any difficulty. If you're a device maker, again, make sure you're collecting this SPI information in the background so that you're constantly keeping everything updated. And again, if you're IP connected, you can go and collect some of this information for services that maybe haven't been updated for a while because you haven't been connected to the DAB in that particular area. Okay, thank you very much. That's my delivery for today. I hope you gained something from it, and we have marvelous metadata.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Absolutely fascinating. Marvellous metadata indeed. And a bit of an insight into your dating life as well. Now we're going to have a bit of a Q&A session. So actually, anyone in the audience, remember, put your hand up. I keep forgetting you guys. Don't be shy, put your hands up. But we will start with a bit of a Q&A from everybody at home. Thank you for your questions. Lindsay, we'll kick it off with you actually, off the back of your presentation. The question is there a certification mechanism for DAB receivers? And then there's a second part to it. How can the end user know if a radio with a DAB Plus logo is going to be compliant with the minimum requirement?
Okay, very good question. Yes, so there is a UK scheme which is currently run by Digital Radio UK, which will be shortly run by Radio Player, but that is a certification scheme for DAB receivers which meet certain requirements. And those requirements were established a long time ago in the UK, but have also, through World DAB, been transformed into a much broader based standard. So there's an ETSI standard which sets out the minimum requirements, and it sets out the way in which receivers have to be tested.
Right.
And all of this testing can be done, and anyone, anywhere can test it. Most receivers, reputable receiver manufacturers, use this standard at least to check their products against this base. There are products which get the tick mark, so-called tick mark, and that's then displayed on the boxes, and that's a process that is licensed. So you have to meet those performance and those functional requirements in order to get the tick mark. And those products are designed for the UK market, but in fact appear, because the same packaging appears all over the place. So it's not an exclusive, but that's the scheme for receivers. And the second part of the question, you'll have to slightly remind me of.
How do you know if a DAB+ logo is compliant with the minimum requirement?
So then we have the DAB+ logo, which is sort of like the world DAB bit, but with a plus. Actually, that just says that it's a DAB product. It doesn't have any kind of performance meaning. It is just identifying that DAB is in the box. Okay. So the thing that identifies something compliant with the minimum requirements is the digital tick mark.
Brilliant. Thank you for explaining that. Hopefully that answers your question as well. So we now have a question for Ben and for April, who is joining us. We've got a lovely picture of you, April, but we are going to hear from you. And this is from Kirk Nesbitt, who would like to know, what recommendations or examples can you share to encourage large numbers of broadcasters to improve their metadata and then also present it in a consistent way?
Recommendations. Maybe I'll tackle that one first and then I'll hand over to April. So we have recommendations inside the EBU that we publish to our members to say what they should be publishing. We certainly recommend that they publish metadata. We certainly recommend that they take steps to make sure their radio stations are available with hybrid radio. We recommend that they publish their data using the ETSI standards or radio DNS standards. They're pretty much the same things, or at least there's a great overlap. Yeah. And we help our members do that as well. So we tell them what to do and we help them to do it, I think is the most important thing. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. And do you want to add anything to that, April?
I would love to. I absolutely love this question. One thing that we always talk about is how radio can look as good as it sounds in the dash. And we have been reaching out to our US stations to talk about the importance of metadata in the dash. And NAB created a best practices report on the digital dash, and we just updated it last year. It has metadata essentials, the type of equipment you need, how to display, loading images, how it's displayed, the type of content, and programming you want, service providers, definitions. It's a very comprehensive guide. And if you search NAB Best Practices Dash or go to nab.org and click on our innovation tab and go to the Auto Initiative, you could download the guide for free. And, we've been working on spreading this message directly to our members as well. We've actually made direct calls to stations, from our Auto Committee and Tech Committee. Our members are calling members just to let them know how important this is. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to understand that, this is something you can do. And so we created this guide. Special thanks to David Lair. He really worked a lot on it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kirk. Hopefully that answers your question for you. Now we're going to hear from Jamie. We've got you live zooming in. Wherever you are, Jamie, it looks very cool. You've got a cool studio going on. Looks like you've got all the gear there.
Yes, I do. It is thanks to our friends at Nova, and they have a very swish studio here. Yes, they do.
Well, the question for you is...
Not my living room, Nikki.
No, exactly. Good. That's what we like to hear. What piece of advice would you give to broadcasters for getting phonemes? And I always want to say phonemes, but it's actually more like phonetics, like phonemes. Is that how you say it? Yeah, phonemes. Oh, that is right. To all platform providers.
The easiest way to do it is to use the voice assistants and look at what comes up. What are the results when you ask for things? I think if you get too tricky with a station name, it becomes harder and harder to make requests be accurately delivered. So simple and distinct, clear names work. The challenge that you have is, of course, accents and those kind of things. So it does actually help to have a variety of people ask for a prospective station name with different accents to see how it goes from there. But the worst outcome you have is that your station name or the name you propose to use is so difficult to understand that a voice assistant won't pick it up. Another problem might be that the name is too generic. So you have to find some midpoint there. So in the case of Nova here, Nova is a fairly distinct name from an Australian point of view. When prior to the voice assistant work that we've done, any request for Nova would result in a Russian pop artist being played on a speaker here. So, so it was a different enough name that we could get it to work. So I think it's just a testing process before you commit to a brand name. And if your brand name already exists, and it is a little bit unusual to ask, think about what distinct phrase you could add on top of that to make it more easily recognizable.
Aha, very interesting. Some good tips there. Thank you very much, Jamie. Ben, we have a final question for you. Will EBU members support Civil Vial's call for mandatory radio buttons in cars that we were talking about earlier?
Oh, you put me on the spot there, aren't you? I couldn't say yes or no.
We'll hold you to it.
Exactly. I'm not sure. I think, as I mentioned before, I'm going to slightly escape the answer there.
Good politician.
Radio needs to be easily accessible, so keeping it simple, keeping the barriers of entry is really important. Whether that's through a radio button or through voice control, I think radio needs to be just the easiest thing. A zero-button strategy for radio is really important.
Well, there you go. You might have to have a conversation with her afterwards about that answer.
Pleasure.
Right, well, thank you so much. Let's give everybody from this session a huge round of applause. We are now going to take a bit of a break. Also, I just want to say a massive thank you to all our audiences that are joining from the Americas, from Australia, all around the world to be with us today, because it's not an easy time zone when you're in those places. So we do really appreciate you tuning in. But don't go away, because we're going to see you in about 20 minutes' time for our final session of the day. See you then.